considering what's going on out in the world tonight, this woman has great friends. I know a lot of you here are connected in various ways. So thank you on behalf of our guests. Thank you, Book Passage. Thanks you, as always. Thank you for supporting independent bookstores like this one, especially on a night like this. If you've got a cell phone, if you can check that and make sure it's on silent or turned off, everyone around you will appreciate that. And if you haven't had a chance to pick up a copy of Justine's book yet, you will be able to do so in about an hour after some presentation and some Q&A. The books are at all the registers, and once you pay for them, bring one back in here, and she'll be signing at the table at which she is standing. Normally, there would be a lot of people here tonight because, fortunately or unfortunately, there are too many Bay Area connections to this topic. Now, the most obvious of which is what happened in Los Angeles. The things that have already happened up here, fights we have fights in restrooms, we have people getting beaten, we have riots in the stands, we have this, stands collapsing, and that's just the first hour of the Republican debate. So, gotta do a Trump joke.
Nice.
I mean, come on, gotta do a Trump joke.
Don't worry, I got a few.
It's really very glad to have you here, and this really is a topic that needs to be discussed. I'm just going to read, there are a lot of great reviews of this book, but I'm just going to read the last sentence of one of them by Rachel Nichols, CNN anchor, who says at the end of her review, "Fascinating read. Plus, how do you not love a book which has a first chapter called 'And Then We Burn a Couch'?" Which is, that's not a bad first chapter title at all. So our friend and your friend, Justine Gubar, is a 4-time Emmy Award-winning investigative journalist. For almost 2 decades, she's worked as a television producer for ESPN, where she's covered every major sporting event you can possibly think of, including golf.
Yes,
Including golf, okay, yes. And the Olympics, and as well as investigating major institutions in the sports world. She's a member of the San Francisco Writers Grotto, which does events down at our Ferry Building store, and is a former John S. Knight Fellow at Stanford University. Go Cardinal, would you please welcome Justine Gubar.
Thank you. That might have been my best intro yet. Thank you. I'm impressed. So what I'm going to do is read a selection from the book for you guys, and then we'll do some Q&A, and then I have a little surprise in store, a little fun element, and then I will sign every last book, so please stick around. I thought tonight, because of what's going on in the world, I would read this particular section to you. I think there's a little crossover. All day I've been walking around telling people, just say no to Trump. If you're looking for crazy, I can give you crazy at my book reading. And literally I was on KGO radio this morning, and they were saying, if you're not going to stay home for the Republican debate, then make it on over to Book Passage. So that has been the theme all night.
Sorry, I'm going to be a producer here for a second.
That's okay, I can relate.
All right.
So that has been the theme all day, and I thank you guys for coming out and just saying no. The section I'm going to read to you, there are just a couple characters that I want to explain to you. There's a gentleman called Lorenzo Cantucci, and he is basically a hooligan lawyer. He protects those soccer fans and defends those soccer fans who get in trouble with the law. So you just need to know that. To understand the passions that swirl in the hearts of fans outside the United States, history is a helpful starting point. Nationalist, ethnic, and political identities are embedded in fandom, which isn't the case in the United States. In America, Republicans and Democrats often sit side by side, united by a sports team. But in other countries, fan groups can embrace specific political leanings and ideologies. Ultras in countries like Ukraine, Turkey, and Egypt have aligned to protest government. Franjo Tuđman, the first president of independent Croatia, once remarked that football victories shape a nation's identity as much as wars do. In 1990, a match between 2 rival Yugoslav teams, Red Star Belgrade and Dinamo Zagreb, erupted into thunderous violence and was shut down after only 10 minutes of play. Police unleashed tear gas on the crowd and more than 60 people were injured. The tension was considered a symbol of the burgeoning independence movement throughout the Balkan region, as the game pitted Croats, Dinamo Zagreb, against Serbs, Red Star Belgrade. A year later, the Yugoslav wars would officially start, followed by some of the world's most brutal bloodshed. In Italy, the lines of rivalry are drawn according to region. I am more Roman than Italian, Lorenzo Cantucci explained to me, adding, "We are a nation only since the 19th century, but we are barely a nation. A guy in Naples feels more Neapolitan than Italian. And if you go to Bergamo in the north, you can't understand a word they say. In this kind of culture, it's more intense between football fans because we are very connected with our city." The concept of campanilismo, the sense of belonging to one's hometown or province, more so than a country as a whole, comes from the Italian word campanile, which translates to church tower, usually the most important and tallest building in a town. On the field, clashes are often rooted in historical rivalries that may date from the Middle Ages. "We fight against other teams because of the campanilismo," said Mario Corsi, a Roman radio show host. Parum-pum-pum, parum-pum-pum. The staccato beat of a drum bounced off the ancient masonry during my visit to the Renaissance city of Siena in the Tuscany region of Italy. A crowd had gathered to watch what looked like a marching band. As I navigated the narrow cobblestone streets, trying to get to Piazza del Campo, the town center, a group of men dressed in ceremonial garb paraded by me. They were wearing green velvet coats that stopped at their rears to reveal tights with one leg green and one red. No pants. Some were banging on drums and some were waving green flags in the same color scheme as their clothing. The band looked more Colchester than college halftime, but their demeanor was serious. They were carrying on a centuries-old tradition. Since 1597, Siena has been home to the oldest horse race in the world, Il Palio. Run twice a year, the Palio pits neighborhoods. In Italian, each neighborhood is known as a contrada, against one another in a smash-mouth battle for civic pride. Jockeys dressed in the elaborate colors and symbols of each contrada race bareback, making tight circles around the main square. A huge crowd swells in the center of the square, cheering from the depths of their cores. There are 17 different contrade, but only 10 compete in the race. Each is usually named for an animal, but other symbols are also used. For instance, a seashell or a tower. The marching band I ran into was from the Drago, or dragon contrada. Golden dragons were etched onto their elaborate red and green flags. I made it to the piazza where the Palio was scheduled to take place in a little bit more than a month. While Siena is known for its majestic horse race, it's also known for a floundering football team. That evening, AC Siena, a second tier or Serie B club, was taking on Padova in a last-ditch effort to qualify for the playoffs. I was headed to the Bar Manginelli, where football fans converge for pre-game revelry. The top league, Serie A, had just finished its season, as the players had to get ready for the FIFA World Cup. Serie B still had a few more weeks to go. Over drinks and bar snacks, 3 football fans explained to me, in a mix of Italian and English, the latest on the predicament of their team. Luciano Sardone works as a television anchor and would be covering the match later. Pietro Poggi owns a takeaway pizza restaurant across the piazza. And Simone Bernini sells water wholesale. I asked their contrada. Sardone is a tortoise, Poggi a goose, and Bernini a shell. For years, Siena players wore jerseys emblazoned with the name of the team's sponsor, the oldest bank in the world, Monte dei Paschi di Siena. A Sienese institution since 1472, and even older than the Palio, the bank's fortunes were intertwined with the city's, as profits were distributed in multiple civic channels. But with the financial crash of 2008 and an ongoing trading scandal, Monte dei Paschi nearly defaulted and had to be bailed out by the government. The bank pulled their sponsorship of the football team, and the team has teetered on the edge of collapse ever since. For Siena supporters, the biggest threat they face isn't a hostile police force or an aggressive cluster of opposing fans. It's that their beloved team may cease to exist if the ownership can't straighten out the team's finances. Winning the game and qualifying for the playoffs would put them one step closer to being promoted to Serie A. With Serie A comes television money that would help finance the team. The team failed to advance and was forced to shut down. It would be an unspeakable tragedy for the fans, shredding to pieces their sense of identity and civic pride. The goose, tortoise, and shell scoffed when I tried to offer solace that the World Cup was coming up in a month. Siena's where the hearts are, not the Italian national team. The bar's owner came over to chat. He was excited to share his past as an ultra from Verona, another Italian city to the north. He brought with him a hardbound book containing lavish photos and text in Italian that I couldn't really understand, but that appeared to be a history of Veronese football fans. The photos illustrated a violent existence. He and his friends were depicted fighting and wielding batons, with some even wearing Nazi insignia. Verona has a history of a staunch right-wing fan base, and he expressed no shame about the Nazi symbols. Suddenly, the piazza became packed, and I started thinking that there was no way all these people could be football fans. AC Siena just doesn't draw that well. The locals, it looked literally to be the entire town, were gathering for an announcement of the final competitors for the polio race. There were 3 spots remaining chosen by lottery. There was no loudspeaker or celebrity stand-in to call out the winner. Rather, someone inside the town hall, which dates from the 13th century, thrust the flag of the chosen contrade out the window of the half-stone, half-brick building. The locals held their breath in the hope that their neighborhood would be picked. The Onda, or wave, the Pantera, or panther, and the Lupa, the wolf, were chosen. Ecstatic shouts rang out. People from the winning contrade began to sing and cheer, reminiscent of football supporters. The marching bands were the first to depart the square after the ceremony. We soon followed and made our way to the football match. In Siena, the football field or ground is located in a park-like setting adjacent to the town. A hotel and apartment building overlook the field. Siena wears white, Padova bright red. 2 children sat in front of my translator and me waving flags. They were 9 and 10 and came with their uncle, who sat behind them up a bit higher. There were quite a few empty seats. The man who sat next to me explained in fragmented English that there were always empty seats and that people no longer come to the stadium since they put the games on television. A banner emblazoned with the phrase, "In spite of everything, heart and fighting spirit," according to my translator, hung across from us. The supporters we met at the bar had disappeared into the crowd. Sardone had gone off to work, while Poggi and Berniti ventured off to sit in the ultra section. As play unfolded, one man screamed that the visiting team was comprised of fat men of shit. Another shouted that a Padova player had the ass of a married woman. My translator told me that she would have to go to church for a week to get over the curses we were hearing in the stands. In a heartening win, Siena got by Padova 2-0. Both goals were scored by Alessandro Rosina, one in each half, keeping the team's playoff hopes alive. But the team ultimately failed to make the playoffs. 6 weeks later, AC Siena filed for bankruptcy and was promptly dissolved. More than 100 years of history were erased. The fans I had met were devastated. Sore, offended, and hopeless is how one described himself in an email. If reformed, the team will have to start at the bottom rungs of the Italian football system and work its way back up. A challenge, for sure, but it has been done before. It's a sad death knell that rang from the Campanile. for AC Siena. And when my book was coming out, I emailed some of those fans I met to see what was going on, if there was an update with their situation, and I want to read to you the email I received back. One of the fans wrote me, "As AC Siena is no longer existing, Siena's brand new squad, called Robor Siena, took place in the Serie D, Italian 4th League, with a huge following of chanting and cheering people. 2 weeks ago, we won the league, and next year, we'll move up to the 3rd one, the Liga Pro. So we are proudly back in professional football. Happiness and joy for our well-damaged heritage. We'll be back, against all odds. Please let me know when you will be back. Wine and polio will never let you down." So I'm happy to answer any questions anyone might have. Andrew?
Hi. Knowing you as an ESPN producer for many years, I'm curious about 2 points in time and two.
Many years, you've known me all my life.
Yes, exactly. I'm curious about 2 points in time, 2 mental points in time. One was the original time when you thought, boy, this is really a good idea to focus on, whether it's a book or something else like that. And then the second was, wow, I'm really going to do this. I'm really going to write this book. Because it's kind of like your own personal departure from what you normally do. And because I haven't been hearing as much about ESPN the last 2 years, I've been hearing about the book. So I'm just kind of curious about what was the initial catalyst and then what was the actual, I'm going to do it.
Good question. That's my first cousin. Closest thing I have to her. I got the idea to write this book after a crazy, insane experience I had at the hands of some crazy fans. I was in Columbus, Ohio, covering the Ohio State football team. They were mired in scandal. This was back in 2011. Their head coach had resigned. Their star quarterback had walked away from the team, and fans were desperate and defensive and really unhappy. And they were lashing out at the national media, of which I was one. They did not like the stories everyone was in town to do. And one day, this local radio show host started talking about me on air, that it was time for me to get out of town, and started talking about the hotel I was staying at, which was sort of an odd experience because I'm a television producer, I'm behind the scenes, I'm the person in jeans and a t-shirt standing next to the cameraman. So people don't really know who I am, but they started talking about me, and mentioning the name of my hotel was not a great idea for safety, so I had to check out and check back in under an assumed name, and all of a sudden I started getting these really hateful messages on my Facebook and my Twitter, and I was called all these obnoxious things. I was called a bitch, a chump, a chimpanzee. Everyone told me how unattractive I was, and that was sort of odd because it was Facebook and you could see the pictures of the people who were calling you meanie. That's all I'm going to say. You can use your imagination. Clearly those people lived in their mother's basement. And then it got worse when I came home to San Francisco. Eventually someone had published my home number on the internet. And my home voicemail, I know it's a little old school and quaint at this point, but my home voicemail was littered with even more nastiness. It was ratcheted up. And at that point, the police got involved, my corporate security got involved. And none of these messages were truly actionable threats. The threshold is pretty high. Basically, someone has to say, I'm coming to your house and I'm going to murder you with a gun tomorrow. You know, like nasty sentiments that you suck and you're lower than a prostitute and don't come back to Columbus don't really cut it, you know, with law enforcement. So they were very nice, but there was nothing they could really do. But all this, you know, being publicly shamed by an internet posse got me thinking, and it got me wondering, what is it about sports that, you know, sports is incredibly enthralling and entertaining and inspiring. I just spent a bunch of time working on Special Olympics stuff. There's some really incredible moments, but there are some really disheartening moments. There's a darkness, there's an ugliness. Fans sometimes just have no boundaries. And that's what I experienced. And that's what started making me look into this and wonder as to the whys and the different stories and anecdotes. And that's how this all got started. So what was your second question?
And so you had a thought, and then when did you actually say, I'm actually going to do this? Because that starts a huge journey into the research, the actual second pursuit.
Well, I sort of figured out how to write a book proposal, and it didn't go anywhere after a while. And then eventually someone came out of the woodwork and said, yes, we'd like to publish your book. So at that point, it was the point of no return. And I was like, okay, here we go. So it was sort of a little bit rote by then. Like once someone wanted to publish it, I'm like, okay, here we go. Abe.
Yeah. How many different countries did you go to looking at the sports fans? I know you were in Italy and...
Yes, because you were in it.
Well, I knew.
I took an initial trip to England and Belgium because I felt like you couldn't talk about crazy sports fans without investigating soccer fans, and England was sort of the birth of it all. So I went to England, and then I went over to Belgium because there was a World Cup qualifier going on at that time in a stadium known as Heysel, where this unspeakable tragedy had happened in the 80s where all these fans had been killed because of chaos entering in and people crushing each other. And there's this unbelievable video of this match where they continue on and they play it, and you literally see dead bodies on the sidelines. And it was a real pivotal moment in the history of sports and crowds and dealing with fans and dealing with hooliganism. So I talk about Fanaticus, going back to Belgium, and I meet with some former hooligans, but they turn out not to really be completely retired. It was amazing. I met with someone who was, 40x years, and he's still banned from his team because he ran onto the field and went after his goaltender, and yeah, like, oh, you never got over any of this? No. And he had received a text the day before I met him, inviting him to fight with some opposing fans at that World Cup qualifier I had gone to. Now he showed it to me, it was in Dutch. It really could have said, what time are you coming home for dinner? I don't know for sure, but I will take him at face value that he was being invited to continually engage in some hooliganism. So that was England and Belgium, and then I wound up going to Italy because I had a pre-planned trip to Italy that I did not want to cancel, but I sort of turned it into, half personal trip, half work trip, and spent time in Rome with some hardcore fans and went to this match in Siena, which I read to you, that selection. And then I spent some really fun times in some old dusty Roman museums looking at some relics of fandom, which was really fun. There was one day I went to this museum and we were looking for curse tablets, which were these metal objects where people would literally curse out rival chariot drivers. You may be familiar with the Circus Maximus in Rome, that big circle that is now just a giant dirt patch. But back in the day, it was known for chariot racing, and back in the 4th century, people were just as hardcore then as they are now, and that was my example of ancient trash talking. Yes.
You mentioned the kind of conflict there is, because on one hand, there's the great side about sports and the inspiration and everything, and then the negative side that you've witnessed. Because of that, and because you work in the sports industry, obviously you must have some affinity for it. But were you conflicted at all, or felt like it could look bad for you in your career to highlight some of the negative parts of sports and sports fans?
That's a good question.
That's who you work for, basically, are those fanatics.
Yes, there's a quote on the back of my business card that is in the book that I probably can't even quote for, word for word. That's how much time I spend looking at my own business card. But it basically says something along the lines that our mission is to serve sports fans. And we do. And serving sports fans is great because there's this unbelievable commonality. But then there is a portion of the population who are over the top. And I don't think that anyone would really dispute that. I haven't gotten any pushback. I think people understand this is a necessary conversation, and it will only make, you know, the sports world as a whole better to sort of look at this.
It's the fans who are overserved.
Yes, that's a quote in my book about how certain fans get overserved, and I laugh at that because that's a total euphemism for saying drunken idiot, basically. And sort of blaming, you know, overserved, like who's doing that? The server? No, these people are drinking too much, you know, plain and simple.
Do you feel that there's anything more that the actual sports teams or, you know, the business side of it and the stadiums could be doing to kind of bring this in?
It's a challenge. It's sort of a marketing conundrum because you do not want to bite the hand that feeds you. These are your paying customers. You want to monitor them, but not over-monitor them because you don't want to chase them away, especially nowadays where the entertainment dollar is challenged. It's hard to get people to leave their house. Look at the empty seats in the front row here. And the television experience is great for sporting events. I mean, how many times do you hear, I'd rather stay home and watch it on television? I say that. So it's a challenge. And a lot of times when we're talking security and safety and keeping out, you know, unruly fans and monitoring the drunks, it all comes down to money. And security is expensive, and it's not money you're making back. It's a loss leader. And, you know, everyone who works in security will tell you that it's money teams don't want to spend, but they know they need to. So it's a delicate balancing act. Yes?
You know, there was an article in the International Herald Tribune in the late 90s looking at sports from the perspective of theologians, psychologists, sociologists, and what they seemed to concur on was the binary thinking of the sports fan, where it was us against them. And that really reflects more of the underpinnings of our civilization, you know, subject, object, blood, flesh, spirit, you know, mind, body. So this binary construction that is built into the way that we're going to pivot one thing over the other. But then when it's, you know, tied into the confusion of individualism and individuality, and where our socialization is really individualism as a social construct and not the growth of the individual. And then marketing, when you're talking about $13 billion just selling sports logos and products, you know, you want to feed into that feeling of that person where they identify with it and they shop. So it's part of our consumer society, part of the binary construction of our civilization. Do you see that dovetailing to what you've noticed just, you know, traveling around in Europe and here?
Well, I think first and foremost, we almost see a survivalist element. And I think we're hardwired to bond with people in our tribe and protect from outsiders. And when you're talking about modern day tribes, nothing really bears that out more than sports fans and, you know, Michigan football fans, Boston Red Sox fans, Oakland Raider fans. And these are the modern day tribes.
That's brought up within the theologians, but at the same time, when you're looking at the California Indians, like the Ohlone, they don't really have this concept of war because there's such an abundance here, which makes it very different from other tribes, showing that there's other possibilities. And considering we're supposedly civilized, then how do we get to this more non-binary state of consciousness instead of this one we're in constant conflict to where it's just a game and we're killing each other?
Well, some, I think, might say that what has replaced war is the sports competition. And while we're not killing ourselves, we're competitive and we're aggressive.
Well, that's interesting. We're on a war-based economy. So I don't see how that transcends that economics.
Could be, absolutely. Yes,
Do you support women's boxing?
women's boxing? Sure.
You do? Not too sexy.
You're not a fan of Rhonda?
I don't know.
Abe?
So, who are the craziest fans in the world? Like, are they like New York
Well,
Knicks, or what's the?
I think there's a lot of moral relativism when it comes to sports fans. And Michigan State fans will tell you that Michigan fans are the worst. And Chargers fans will tell you that Raiders fans are the worst. Like, it's very easy to couch your definition into what you want it to be. But I actually do have a theory to who the worst sports fans are. And it has nothing to do with the NFL or, any given college football team. I think some of the worst sports fans we see are parents trolling the sidelines and heckling their kids and heckling other people's kids and lashing out at coaches and lashing out at referees. And there's really a two-pronged attack with that. Not only are some Uber parents acting like jerks, but they're setting an example for the next generation of sports fans. So they're raising their kids in their own shadow, and that's disturbing. I would like to think that the next generation of sports fans know how to be a great sports fan, not an obnoxious sports fan. And I think that's where it gets lost sometimes. Yes.
I'm Lisa Olson's sister.
Karen.
Hi. So, yeah, I know the history of really bad sports fans.
Yes.
Right? So, I, in a way, think how sports journalism has changed so much. So it used to be really good investigative reporting in newspapers and magazines, and now it's all blogging and kind of pseudo-journalism to me, but it's created this way for anybody to respond and all these ugly sports fans to come out. So I don't know, I feel like the sports media has somewhat been responsible for this, like putting it out there for all these, and people can be anonymous. And
I talk about social media and
Yeah.
the effects in the book a lot because it's this two-way street. And on one hand, you can now tweet at your favorite athletes and they may respond to you. You can bond with other fans. I talk about two fans in the book who are Boston Red Sox fans and they meet on Twitter and they get married. That's pretty cool. I talk about an NBA player who meets up with a fan because they're tweeting at each other and he signs autographs from him. So there's this real access element that's great. But then the flip side of it is you can say anything.
Yeah.
There's a lot of anonymity. And it multiplies at this crazy speed of light. I mean, part of what you're talking about on the internet now is one story gets repeated and repeated and repeated. And there's not all this original reporting. It's curating and repeating and sharing. So one person acts like a jerk and runs onto the field or streaks or heckles a player or whatever, and that becomes the biggest story of the day because it goes viral. And it gets repeated and shared and repeated and shared, and that's what sticks, and that's what people respond to, and that's what sort of defines the environment now. So I think there's pluses and minuses, and I certainly was a victim to the minuses. But yeah, it's a challenge. It's definitely a challenge in the media landscape, and I agree with you when you say a lot of the media is to blame, because I can't tell you how many times I go online and I see a story repeated by 70 different news outlets, which makes it a bigger story, and it wasn't that important to begin with, but the sheer quality or volume makes it so. Yes, sir.
Related to what she's saying, for authors, a lot of authors who come here talk about social media and that they get instant criticism, sometimes mostly anonymous, very nasty, correcting authors and or just going after them in the same way that you're talking about. Have you had that as an author as well with this book particularly?
Good question. I've gotten some negative responses to media appearances I've made, but I think because one of the things I talk about is my Ohio State experience, and I'm sort of calling out bad fans, that people choose not to pile on to that. They don't want to fulfill the expectation. And I was sort of ready for that. I was ready for Ohio State fans to go bonkers on me. I told my people in publicity, I'm not doing any media in Ohio. No good can come of that. And it hasn't really been that way. And I've gotten some messages on Twitter and stuff of Ohio State fans apologizing on the behalf of other fans. And that was sort of nice and uplifting and surprising.
Yeah.
So far, so good, I would say.
Great.
But
Yeah.
I think that probably can change in an instant.
Yeah.
So I went to the A's play the Yankees before I read your book, and then I went to see the A's play the Cleveland Indians after I read your book. It was a much different experience.
How so?
Well, going through security, I was like, these people aren't doing anything.
They call that security theater. It's like the airports. They make you think they're on top of
It
things.
was in the
but-
whole crowd, and then the waves started going around, and it just felt very menacing. And it
So I
affected the
ruined
game.
your sporting experience,
It's
is that what
over,
you're
thanks.
saying?
It was different. It was definitely different, but it opened my eyes to a lot of things.
I'm glad, I guess.
Any comments on Deflategate?
Huh.
Yeah.
Let's see. I
Careful.
So I did go to the same university as Bill Belichick. A random fact for you. I did hear about a great product this evening that you can purchase a Deflategate hat, which is a deflated football sort of in the vein of the cheese head hat, the slice of cheese you see Packers fans wearing. And you heard it here first, that's going to be a big seller this football season. You're going to see it everywhere, every cutaway in NFL games, the Deflategate hat. Anna, did you have something?
Yeah, so at any point during the mean comments and did you want to like quit? And what inspired you to keep going if so?
I did not want to quit because it would be giving those people satisfaction. And I did not want to quit because I knew I had to keep paying my mortgage. And also, I find that when you get a lot of fan vitriol, that means you're onto something. Like you're on a good story, fans are telling you to go away because they don't want you digging. They don't want you in town, there's a reason for that. So to me, you know, if you suffer through it, there's a reason for it. Anything else?
Cousin?
Andrew.
I guess I asked two-part questions. Biggest surprise during your research for the book, and biggest surprise in the book writing process?
How hard it is. Anything I imagined beforehand, it was that much harder, that much more time consuming, that much more of an emotional roller coaster. Any book you see in here, these people are rock stars. So the biggest surprise, good question. I will say that one thing people always like to ask is, why are those fans rioting after their team wins? You know, they won the Super Bowl, they won the national championship, and now they're burning couches, flipping cop cars. What gives? And I talk about some science behind that actually, if you look at some studies, they will tell you that the reason why fans riot after their team wins is because winning stimulates testosterone. And that is the hormone of aggression. They literally measured this by measuring the spit in the mouths of Brazilian World Cup fans. And they found that their testosterone rose when their team won. So you think...
I have a huge follow-up question. So is
Yes.
this all about men then?
I interview a female hooligan, a woman who grew up in Germany, running with hooligans, but I would say most of the bad fans I came across were men, a lot of white men. But one thing I do, one of the points of my book is that...
Should I leave now?
You can stay. One of the points of my book is the universality of bad behavior. I sort of came to conclude that it's easy for just regular people to get caught up in it, and free-flowing alcohol doesn't help, and social media, knowing you could go viral at any minute, doesn't help. so watch out. Keep your eye on your kids.
I have girls, well,
I'm
right.
innocent.
There's still time. Anything else? I have one thing before we close and do the book thing. This is the game show part of the evening. I mentioned that I had experienced all that craziness when I was in Columbus, Ohio, and one thing I had to do was check into hotels under assumed names. So I am throwing it out to the audience. If anyone can guess what assumed names I used.
Mary Tyler Moore.
There were two. No, Mary Richards, but no. I have a gift for you, a prize. I did this online in an interview, and all these people were guessing men's names, which I thought was really strange. Why would I check into a hotel under a guy's name? But whatever. So throw out your guesses. I'll show you what you can win. Anything? Anything?
Are there any hints?
Betty Rebel.
No, but that's good. I like that.
Carly Fiorina.
This is what you can win, a Fanaticus t-shirt. You can have this crazy guy on your chest. Anyone?
What sport was she in?
Not in any sports. One was a fictional character, and one was a real person in my life. Anyone? Anyone?
Sandy Gubar?
What was my guess?
You're actually pretty close, but no, I can't use the same last name.
Blanche Silverman?
But you're close, but you're not there, but you're really close.
I'm thinking.
Anyone?
Elaine Bennis.
Oh, so close.
That's
Yeah. All right. Well, I'm not giving it away till somebody wins. It's an ongoing contest, so you'll have to keep.
Silverman.
No, it's
Really?
Who?
My mother's maiden name. And to be fair, this is my uncle. That's his last name. So here you go, Auntie. But there's still another fictional character that remains to be guessed, so keep it coming. You guys can email me. Justine at Fanaticus the book. So let's do books. What do you think?